I think the greatest testimonial for our team is that we're part of most of the onboarding for any new personnel in the operating room at SPD. They spend time with the Karl Storz on-site endoscopic specialist as part of their onboarding. And so they're getting firsthand knowledge from Karl Storz, essentially, how the best way to care and handle for this equipment and utilize it.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal to help you fight dirty. Every instrument, every time. Whether you are tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go beyond clean.
On this vendor spotlight, we are speaking with Crit Fisher, Director of On-Site Service and Operations, and Marina Dragatsis, On-Site Endoscopic Specialist 2 with Karl Storz. We are going to be talking about their On-Site Endoscopic Specialist program and the value that this team brings across the country. It's a large team, nearly 250 OESs across the country deployed for the management of Karl Storz endoscopic equipment so that the program can run smoothly. We're going to talk about all of that, and we're going to hear a case study, I guess, or just an example of the great work that one OES does, because Marina's at an account that's doing kind of a new procedure, fetoscopy. We're going to learn about that today and how she really took a different level of involvement with her account to help make sure that they had all the resources and equipment and developed efficiencies for the management of that equipment so that sterile processing wasn't reprocessing things that they didn't need to, and still ensuring that the surgeon has everything that they need to do this cutting edge procedure. So stay with us. We're going to be back with Crit and Marina after a short break.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
Speaking with me today is Crit Fisher, Director of On-Site Service and Operations, and Marina Dragatsis, On-Site Endoscopic Specialist 2 with Karl Storz. We've got a great, I'd say, a story for you today, a real great success story. And two wonderful people joining us. We're going to start with Marina. I know you're going to end up doing a lot of the talking by the end of this because you're doing some really fantastic work for a customer that you're with just about every single day, Marina. I thought maybe you could just tell us a little bit about your background, how you found yourself at Karl Storz, and maybe tell us one thing that you just love about your job.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. My name's Marina. I grew up in Colorado and I went to Colorado State, and from there, I did an internship in the medical device industry, and I attended medical sales college to kind of broaden my horizons into this whole world. And from there, I applied to Karl Storz and started reaching out to people. And from there, just started as an on-site at my account and have been loving it ever since. The thing I love most about my job is probably the cases that I cover. I really, really love the fetoscopy program. It's one of my favorite parts of my whole job.
Yeah, well, I'm interested in learning more about fetoscopy as well because I've worked with children and in pediatrics in a nursing capacity, but it's been many years, and I definitely had not seen that kind of procedure ever in my life. So super interesting to me. Crit, I want to get you introduced as well. Can you talk about your background and your role with Karl Storz as well?
Yes, thank you so much. Thanks for this opportunity. I have a very fortunate background in that I was actually a customer of Karl Storz. I was a clinical coordinator for laparoscopic surgery. So I was able to see firsthand how the instrumentation that Karl Storz created had an impact on our patients. So when the opportunity came, I interviewed for a position, which was incredibly long ago, it seems like, but then short, 20 years ago with Karl, and I got the position with Karl Storz, and I've kind of been on the service side ever since. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting background having the ability to actually use the product for our patients, making them healthy.
Yeah. Well, I can imagine you were familiar with Karl Storz, back before you were even a customer. But maybe before we dive in, you can just talk a little bit about the company. What are the areas of focus, especially your area of focus? And we could talk about maybe, why you were their customer and how the services have evolved over time since then.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. I mean, Karl Storz, what I think is so incredible is the way that we really partner with our healthcare providers to improve patients' lives. And it's not just within the U.S. Karl Storz is a global company. And we work in close collaboration with our surgeons and the healthcare community. And we continuously work to refine and to re-optimize what we're doing from an organization, right? So that could be imaging, that could be developing more instrumentation. But what we're talking about today is really optimizing solutions for our customers. And I think that's what I'm most excited about to talk about.
Yeah. And I also want to talk a little bit about, just development and technology, but then the other areas where Karl Storz is an industry leader as well. People, I think, especially listeners to Beyond Clean are really familiar, at least in concept, with this, particular program. And obviously they've seen, products that have, some real advanced technology behind them. But there are other areas that Karl Storz is really helping hospitals that might be even lesser known, right?
Yeah, correct. I mean, I think for myself, everyone's used to seeing the rigid endoscope, right? The rigid endoscope really hasn't changed a whole lot over these years. But what we've done is we continue to grow the video platform in our integrated operating rooms, which really allow the staff to be tuned in, focusing on their patient while the room and our on-site endoscopic specialist, TSTs, actually supports the staff. So we always like to say we leverage our team to lift yours. And so again, very excited to talk about the on-site program.
Well, let's talk about, what's kind of going on in the industry that really ties to that program. Like, what are hospitals dealing with? And realize, Crit, you've got a lot of experience. You've seen a lot of different hospitals, but Marina, even if you want to talk specifically about the account that you support too, to add to that conversation, feel free to chime in. But, from a broad kind of industry, high level, Crit, what do you kind of see happening in the industry today that is really bringing even more value to your program?
Sure. I've got a couple things. I'm sure Marina is going to be able to add a couple more that are specific for her. But we've all heard of the big migration from healthcare. And in the complex landscape of challenges facing the U.S. healthcare industry, nothing's more pressing than the acute shortage of skilled personnel. And according to the American Hospital Association fact sheet, there will be an estimated shortage of up to 3.2 million healthcare workers by 2026. And those vacancies can be challenging, specifically when you're talking about equipment that's not easy to use and areas that require you to follow very detailed instructions. But it's not just about the vacancies, it's always the challenges. And Beyond Clean knows and is very much aware of best practices, regulations, and efficiencies that are needed in the SPD department. And it seems at times that the SPD is almost always forgotten, but are critical to the continuum of patient care, because we know if it's not clean, it's not sterile. And Marina, I know you've got some own situations at your own facility, and I'd love to hear from you and be able for you to share some of the things that you're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. SPD is definitely one of my bigger services that I help out and cover with. I think one of our biggest challenges with that is just the turnover rate, like Crit kind of mentioned before, the great migration out. And that goes for the OR as well. Constantly new staff having to in-service and re-in-service to kind of hit home with some of those major points in terms of equipment and scopes, and just trying to overall help with workflow. Because, when you have a lot of new people, they don't really understand the general workflow of how things are. So that's kind of what I also focus on, is just operational workflow and trying to make things easier for them and cross-departmentally for that matter. And SPD, they have their strengths, but, we all know how that goes. And we got to really focus in on teaching them how they could understand. I think I really have tried to hit home with that. So taking those one-on-ones if they don't understand how to disassemble something or clean something, or try and find out what is the gap in communication. I think that's kind of one of the biggest points that I've tried to hit home on with my account here.
Marina, you brought up a great point is the workflow, right? So right now with the escalating costs, one of the roles that you play at your facility is eliminating waste and gaining efficiencies. And so that equals return on investment for the program.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think also, to that point about the gap in communication, I mean, that breakdown can be really tough for sterile processing. And one of the things related back to the staffing issues, Crit, that you mentioned is just that once you're downstaffed, being intentional about communicating, it may not be that SPD is not trying to communicate with the OR, but they're also under this demand to kind of keep up with the workload. And so sometimes that can really be a vicious cycle in breaking that communication down. It's not that anybody's doing anything wrong, but if you don't have adequate staffing, it can be very difficult. And Marina, I'm assuming in your role, you're kind of floating through the different departments. So you're a conduit for communication.
Definitely. I'm more of like a liaison between the two departments. So one of the biggest things I've been able to accomplish is understanding how things work in the OR and how that doesn't always translate to SPD. So they don't necessarily understand the why we have to do things a certain way. And sometimes it goes the other way where the OR doesn't understand why SPD has to do something a certain way. So it's kind of my job now to kind of be the liaison between the two, teach both sides so that way everyone understands what we're trying to accomplish. And with that, it takes a lot of communication and understanding how everyone learns differently. And I think it's something that you have to really tackle no matter where you work or whether it's a hospital or not. It's just understanding where people are coming from to really get the end goal.
So, Crit, we heard a lot from Marina about maybe the intangibles that she's bringing to the position, but I'd like a real concrete kind of breakdown of like, what does an on-site endoscopic specialist do on like a day-to-day basis and really dive into that. And I
Sure.
can see Marina already in listening to you. You're like, yeah, Crit's going to tell us the job role, but it's always a lot more than that. You're always, you're bringing something extra to the table too.
Thanks. I'll give you a very high level, and then I'll break it down to how I really see this program, right? So a very high level, the on-site endoscopic specialists, they're a dedicated full-time resource for the hospital, right? And we provide face-to-face support in the perioperative space. So SPD, we do it obviously in the operating room. In some cases, it's in clinics. It could be in the emergency department. It could be in clinical care areas. Obviously, in Marina and her space, and with her especially when she's working, biomedical is very much involved in a lot of the things that she's doing. So that's another department, right? But I think what makes our program so unique is it's not an out-of-the-box solution, Justin. The customer, we listen to them to find out what their pain points are, and we're able to address at that point each specific pain point and then build a program to address those pain points versus just saying, here's your solution, right? And so people say, tell me about the program. What do you think this is? Imagine, Justin, if you had a fire marshal that was in your house every single day, and all they did was going around and try to find ways to prevent fires from happening. But in the event there is a fire, that fire marshal takes their hat off and becomes a firefighter. And that's what the OAS's role is. They're to be fire marshals, but at any point can switch that hat and become a firefighter and save a lot of time, a lot of effort immediately on site within minutes of a call.
That is a really great analogy. I mean, I like how there's like a dual role there, and nobody wants to be in a crisis, but let's face it, the crises happen every day in perioperative, environments across the country. And, a lot of times to your point, Marina, about explaining the why, it feels like once the crisis happens, that's another one of those scenarios where the communication can break down. And a lot of times that load just falls right on sterile processing. And, how often do, organizations take time to go back and stop and debrief on what happened after the fact? And so, and sometimes the details even get all muddled up. And so I think having somebody who's really seeing it from all those different sides and can switch that hat really quickly to help de-escalate the situation and keep things moving along is really an enormous value. I also kind of want to hear about the training that you go through, because obviously you got a couple of different roles there. And I keep mentioning the intangibles, Marina, because you exude intangibles. But, I think a lot of that, like the de-escalation of a situation, it might get tense, right? There may be conflict that happens when things don't go right. And so I can see that, being a big part of it, but you've got to be competent. You can't just have the intangible, to diffuse the situation. You got to have the training and kind of know the circumstances that you're working in. So what is that program like?
Yeah, so our training program, it's 120 plus hours of training essentially, right? So there's a combination of didactic and hands-on training. We actually, at our facility where we do our training, have a mock OR where we actually physically set it up and intentionally create issues that the on-site's going to see in the field. So they're able to actually troubleshoot hands-on right then. We create the environment of actually having a surgeon, a nurse, anesthesiologist. So as much as we can, create that environment, right? Because the equipment can be taught. I can teach anyone how to evaluate a rigid scope. But like Marina, who is a Swiss Army knife, I can't train those other types of responses, right? The mitigation, the communication, time management, organization, all those things are outside of that. So that's important. So creating that environment helps. Then they have an apprentice stage. They're going to be able to work with an on-site in the field. They may actually physically be at that facility, or an on-site can come to their facility. And then there's the self-learning aspect, right? So we have a learning management system with all kinds of different modules. But then you have those kind of nuances, right? It's a customizable program. So for Marina has a very specific goal with photoscopy. And Marina, I mean, you could tell, I mean, a lot of it's self-study, but I'll let Marina speak for herself because, again, she's one of our best on-sites in our organization, and she's working with our littlest patients.
Yeah, so specifically for photoscopy, it was very much self-learning because it's very specialized, it's very niche. Not every hospital has it. So with that, I really took the time to really learn the instrumentation, really learn the workflow of how these procedures would be rolling out. I mean, I was actually really lucky enough to be a part of a new procedure within photoscopy at my account. And with that, I was in charge of the logistical planning in terms of trays, incoming equipment. And with that, I worked with the surgeon one-on-one. And, I really got to see how this instrumentation would be used, not in a procedure prior, which I thought was one of the coolest parts. And with that, I shared with him my spreadsheets. I'm like, okay, like this fits with this. Here's your French sizes. Here's it in millimeters. This, I think it'll fit well with this tray. This will be better off in this tray, and kind of just go from there. So it was really a very self-taught type of thing, but I definitely had my support of my reps and of course stores with the facts of the instrumentation. But learning the workflow of a field case was definitely a learning curve, but I was ready for the challenge with that.
It wasn't until just now that I realized that there's a supply and logistics component to your role. I understood the various clinical capacities between, the OR and SPD, but it wasn't until you just described how you went into this area and helped the surgeons and you consulted with them so that when they began to do this specialized procedure that, as you said, not everybody is doing, that they had what they needed. And not that it was just cleaned and sterilized, but even from the very beginning of sourcing, what is that, count sheet going to look like? What's the pick list going to look like? How are we going to know that we're set up for the case? And so how did you teach yourself any of that supply and logistics part? Did you just kind of tapped into your resources and it was just kind of a necessity of the job, or how? Because I hadn't really picked up on that until just now.
Yeah, I'm a big spreadsheet person. I have a lot of spreadsheets. I think Chris could have seen a lot of them. But I don't really know how I learned how to do that. I think it was just more of like, here's this count list coming in with 64 new items. Like, how am I going to manage this? So I just typed them all in my Excel spreadsheet, cross-referenced it with our current trays. Okay, well, this will fit with this type of tray for this type of procedure. And kind of just go down the line, of course, get approval from our nursing coordinator and the surgeon himself. But I came up with like a mock count list basically for the procedure. And he said, looks good. So kind of went from there, but it was kind of all just trial and error. From there, I just went through and kept chatting with a lot of communications with that. So just self-taught in that way, I guess.
You're kind of like a Swiss Army knife. And so I could see this consultative approach where you're just figuring out where the needs are to help make sure that everything goes smoothly, and you're kind of gluing it all together in that way. But that's really interesting. So Crit, I can imagine, I know Marina's a rock star, but I can imagine all of the on-site endoscopic specialists kind of function in that same way, in that, they're consistently assessing. And they're assessing for a lot of things like opportunities to educate, opportunities to improve communication. I mean, that is definitely not only a unique role in many cases for a healthcare organization, but also a really unique skill set to be able to pull off.
Yeah, I think it's important, and thanks for bringing that up, to understand that, typically in the operating room, and now I'm speaking from experience, right, and being in the operating room, it took for a lot of things to happen before it was brought to our attention that, hey, there's a problem, right? Is it a problem with the handling? Is the surgeon not utilizing the equipment correctly? Are the sets not optimized? Are we reprocessing sets too much and breaking instrumentation? And I think that's another niche that on-site provides, right? To be able to go in and look, like Marina looked at that set and said, this is the way to optimize that. Okay. And also not just taking that optimization, but training both the operating room staff and the SPD staff on this is how you care for that equipment. Oh yeah. And by the way, I think the greatest testimonial for our team is that we're part of most of the onboarding for any new personnel in the operating room SPD. They spend time with the Karl Storz on-site endoscopic specialist as part of their onboarding. And so they're getting firsthand knowledge from Karl Storz, essentially, how the best way to care and handle for this equipment and utilize it.
All right, Marina, now I want to come back to you as kind of, telling more of your story. I really want to kind of understand the work that you've done at this account, because we're kind of highlighting, some of the very specific things that you've done to help hit all of those areas that Crit was just talking about, reducing damage, how to, care and handling, improving those count sheets to make sure that they have, the right products in the trays to make sure that, there isn't excess to be reprocessed, and honestly, I think any SPD front line is going to say less instruments means we can turn these around faster. We can clean them faster. Like we can do better for the OR, and having kind of some constant monitoring around that, I think is really important too. So maybe you could dive real deep into, this one project that you worked on with your current account that highlights, maybe something above and beyond kind of the normal day to day, but how you can continue to work on process improvement.
Yeah. So one of the biggest problems I saw when I first onboarded was that they had a lot of containers blue wrapped. And with that, those are plastic containers, and they were, I would say, on the more damaged side. So with that, I kind of brought up to the purchasing director. I was like, hey, we're having to turn these instruments over more because a lot of the trays are having holes in them being blue wrapped. So I showed them, this is what you can do with our containers, and you can have better inventory management with this as well. You can label them better. You can make sure that the specific instruments are fitting well in their trays. And so we tried that with the laparoscopic instruments. We converted all 12 of our 5mm trays. Following that, we converted all 7 of our 3mm trays. And then moving forward, that was such a success, and we've seen far less breakage, far less missing items with that. We went ahead to our GU department and converted all of their plastic containers from just regular plastic blue wrap that were all the instruments were in there very tightly. The scopes were kind of touching other sharper instruments. And I showed them, here's one tray, here's what this could look like. And they went ahead and converted their entire GU scope inventory to our metal container trays, which has been a really big success. We've seen, from my breakage reports alone, we've seen far less scope breakage, far less instrument breakage, because we have a lot more of these instruments and where they should be in their blue inserts, which has been really beneficial. And with that, when you have all of your instruments, not missing to par, no broken scopes in there, you can kind of focus deeper on the actual value that you could bring to an account. And with that, I've been running like product usage reports. And so with that, I can run the tray uses for the day and the whole month. So if we're continuously seeing trays being turned over and they're being called for cases, and they're having to be like either one trade, not for scopes, but instruments one trade or something like that, I can kind of show them like, hey, this tray's at 200% max utilization. This definitely calls for a need for a scope or another tray to be ordered, and kind of show value in that way operationally. And with that too, you do see everything from all angles. So being in the OR, I can kind of see, hey, those instruments are not really used in that tray, if ever, for a procedure. Why don't we make a separate tray for that? That way they're not having to turn over, 60 plus items in a tray. Let's make that like a separate specialized tray. That way, if they do need those instruments, it's in its own and doesn't have to be turned over each and every time that they're using that main core tray. And I actually did that for one of the fetal trays. They had a scope and the specific instruments used for a procedure. And I noticed that they weren't really using the scope in the tray, but they were using the instruments. However, when they would open the tray, the scope would have to be reprocessed anyway. and that was causing breakage unnecessary. So what we did was just order another container, put the scope in a different tray. And then when they need the scope, they just open the scope rather than having to open the entire tray for every procedure. And since then, we actually haven't had that scope break. So, and that's been about 6 months now. So that's really good for that. And I can kind of just carry that over to like any specialty or any department, just find little ways to make it better throughout. I guess another big thing that I did is they were calling for trays when something would be dropped, or if it's like missing a light cord or missing a light adapter, something so small and simple, you can definitely peel pack. So I have a whole peel packing system now for all the specialties that I cover. So they don't have to call for an entire new tray for something so simple like a light adapter. I have like probably 300 of those peel packed around the entire hospital there.
Well, it's so interesting because your instrumentation is so nuanced, right? It's so unique. And so, it's not necessarily something that you're going to use in multiple different types of procedures. So you see that happening where there's like one tray and it's got everything in it, but then there are some common use items. And all of a sudden, because you only have that one tray and you don't have it in a peel pack, then everything you just described is like you have to turn the whole thing over. And, while the equipment's very durable, to your point, every time that you reprocess it, it does, heat and steam puts that, instrumentation through a process. So why continue to do, why escalate normal wear and tear over time when it's unnecessary if you're not using it for every single procedure? And, another thing that you said, there were a lot of really good best practices and points that you made in there. But I've also seen, to your point, where if you don't have a tray that's really securing the instrumentation well, and you've got sharps in with insulated instruments, like how many unnecessary damages to insulation happen because they're just thrown in? And you might even have the most well-designed, setup and holders for the container going up to the operating room. That doesn't mean they're coming back down the same way that they went up. And so, for you to be, somewhat on guard for that, whether you're teaching or actually handling yourself, is so, so important. I mean, I can almost see where the position pays for itself because, if a facility is not doing a good job of protecting their instruments, they can end up spending quite a lot of money in unnecessary preventable repairs.
Absolutely. I mean, since I first started, the breakage has gone down tremendously. I think Crit knows those numbers there. But yeah, I mean, there was a lot of just like little things that were, it took time to fix, I would say. And, every day is something new to fix, but at the same time, they've definitely have gotten their value in terms of scope decrease in breakage, less missing instruments, less broken instruments. And because they have someone at their account who's overseeing kind of all of it, anything that pertains to stores products, you have one person there ready to tackle it on. Oh, a surgeon needs something. Let's see what we can do for it. All along like that, they know they have a resource on site that's, like Crit said, a phone call away for any and all, not even just issues, just to be around and show support.
And Justin, Marina is in one of 108 different accounts that we have on-site endoscopic specialists. So you can imagine the magnitude that every single day, it's unlike when you hire a consultant. The consultant comes in, you pay them a lot of money, they give you the support, and then it's really up to you to implement the changes. When you have marinas, when you have different on-sites, they're able to do that again immediately, and they can actually help drive that through that communication, through being the conduit, so that at the end of the day, the focus is on how can we better take care of our patients? How can we better increase the longevity of our instrumentation? Well, we know we have to all work together for that to happen. And it's so nice to have a Marina, to be able to do that at her facility. But again, 108 facilities, 265 on-sites across the country. So everyone working in tandem.
Yeah, it's about sustaining the program, right? And so we talked at the very beginning about staff turnover. And so you just used a very common occurrence. You bring in a consultant. They kind of tell you what you need to do. They do that assessment. But then it's up to you to make the changes. But it's not – you might make the changes. But then through turnover, all of a sudden there's leakage from those recommendations over time. Culturally, there's a constant re-education. And I also will harken back to something that you said earlier about when new staff comes on board, they spend time with the on-site endoscopic specialist to get that baseline education. And so it's about like once you get those wins, it's great. But how often do you see it where, a hospital spends money, they bring in a consultant, they kind of fix the problem, but then 3 years later, the consultants are back and they're resetting on some of the same issues because there's been, management turnover, leadership turnover, staff turnover. And so having a program, I imagine, there's also probably some turnover on your team from time to time. Maybe they get promoted and they go on and do, other things, for the organization. But you're bringing in a standard program that's coming in behind that with extensive training that is just going to make sure that, okay, even when we have turnover, this service line is going to be maintained regardless. And it's going to have the same sort of quality and education and expectations, consistently throughout. So I can see where that's an enormous value that you're bringing, to your customers. And you said over 250 on-site endoscopic specialists across the country.
It's 236 right now, but we
currently have nearly 250.
Well, so to be honest, we have contracts that are out there that go through the process, right? So we're in process of well over 250 right now if we close our contracts.
That's amazing. So Marina, do you know them all? I'm just kidding. 250 people is a lot of people to know. And so, Crit, I'm sure you know them all, but it's a sizable workforce. That's awesome. And, it speaks to the success of the program. I think, you don't have, nearly 250, engagements going on simultaneously if it's not a program that people clearly see value in. And so I just kind of want to commend you all. I think the training is especially impressive to me. I mean, over 120 plus hours. I mean, that's what it takes. And then you have somebody at the hospital that's a real specialist in this area who's giving it, close attention. Marina, what do the surgeons think? Do you get lots of positive feedback from the surgeons for the program too?
Oh, absolutely. I was out of town last week and I definitely got the where were yous for sure. So they definitely appreciate the presence. Even if it's a very bread and butter case, I always try and pop my head in, say hello. They know I'm there. But yeah, I think the surgeons really do appreciate me being there, I guess any on-site being around. But it's really helpful for the staff too. If the surgeon knows the staff knows that I'm there shouldn't be any problems. So they feel more comfortable. Even if I'm just popping in just to say hello, they enjoy that. Same with the staff as well. I've, formed some really good relationships being here for almost 3 years now. So it's a really special, unique role, most definitely, but it's really cool just to come in every day, say hello to nearly anyone and everyone, because they all know who the on-site is, because, we cover such a vast majority of the departments that use our products. So it's a really unique role that I enjoy.
I think Marina's being a little bit humble. So, Marina being that niche product with Endoscopy, she's been involved in creating and assisting her surgeon in simulcasting surgeries to help consulting across the U.S. and I believe globally too, Marina. I don't want to speak out of turn, but I know for sure that you've been on a couple different calls and a couple different meetings where you're actually helping someone who's at a different facility create those trays that you created.
Something kind of like that, but it's more of like when they come in to visit for the procedure itself. Of course, I meet them. The surgeon is very like, this is Marina, our stores, So if you have any questions, go to her for that. So from that, they they get my number from, my business card, and they know I have a 3-inch binder that's just for fetal, and it has every single procedure in it. In terms of tray listing, good things to know in terms of not just my equipment, but anything that's needed. So anyone can do the procedure in terms of like staffing wise. So if there's ever any questions, they can just refer to the binder, and it has everything in there. So with that, the tray listings are very helpful for when you're putting instruments back, making sure it's going back in the right tray. It's good, just helpful reminders, because, it is so niche. We don't do these procedures every day. So sometimes, a couple of weeks go by, you kind of forget like, oh, we do need this. Oh, we do need that. And so it's really helpful to have that, and kind of referring back to that. That's kind of how I made my little role in the Endoscopy Center for those procedures, is just kind of being the person to remember all those little details. And so that's why I've been kind of on board with when surgeons do come, they, still reach out to me afterwards for any questions. And I talk with our stores reps as well in the area. So kind of just help along with whatever they would need for instrument wise.
Well, speaking of sustainability, creating a resource like a binder to help with all of that training, or when you are out, that they have that resource that they can look back upon, is really, really critical. I do want to let everybody know that they can follow Karl Storz United States LinkedIn page for more information about the company and services, and definitely get more information on their products by visiting go.karlstorz.com/OES. So you get lots of details on the on-site endoscopic specialist program. That's go.karlstorz.com/OES. Crit, Marina, it was really nice speaking with you today. I'm going to kind of wrap it up here. And Crit, anything you want to add before we finish?
No, I mean, I just want to fall back on every hospital is different. And so an out-of-the-box solution is not going to work for every hospital. And I think that's the best thing about this program, is that it is created specifically for the hospital in which is wanting to partner with Karl Storz from an on-site program.
Well, that consultative approach, I think, is critical. And Marina, you are a great example of not only how you continue to consult, but then, build resources and value and process improvements and efficiencies, by being there to support every single day. Anything you want to add before we close?
Like Rich said, the role is broad and narrow at the same time. It's really tailored to the account's needs, which is really fun to hear from other OESs, what they do at their accounts or what they've done that has worked and hasn't worked. It's kind of like a little network of helpers across the whole country, which is really nice. And each account's going to get specialized needs for each onsite there. It's a really great program.
What a incredible collective of just knowledge, experience, and insight into the industry. You all, as a group of on-site endoscopic specialists, I love that. That was Crit Fisher, Director of On-Site Service and Operations, and Marina Dragatsis, On-Site Endoscopic Specialist 2 with Karl Storz. We were talking about the On-Site Endoscopic Specialist program, and really, it's a nuanced program that takes a consultative approach and brings really communication to all parties that are involved and focuses on maintaining a sustainable program for the management of your Karl Storz equipment. And I got to say, what a great program. The sense of pride that Crit has for his team and Marina has for her day-to-day work at her account is really noticeable. And I got to say that I'm really impressed with how she just jumped right in and created resources like the binder on fetoscopy that is kind of a niche procedure that's just emerging. And she helped develop that resource out for the entire staff there. It's just so much above and beyond that's going on to help maintain that program and just bring so much added value. I think the 120 plus hours of training also goes a long way. So really enjoyed today's conversation with Crit and Marina. I want to remind everybody that you can follow the Karl Storz United States LinkedIn page for more information about the company and their services. And you can learn more about the on-site endoscopic specialist program by going to go.karlstorz.com/OES. That's go.karlstorz.com/OES. And I want to thank you all for listening to this vendor spotlight on Beyond Clean.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to Beyond Clean on your favorite podcast app, or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for Beyond Clean in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@beyondclean.net. We look forward to hearing from you.